Warning. The stunts in this video were performed by tiny clay figurines sculpted by yours truly. So for your protection, please do not attempt anything that you will see in this diorama. Today we're building a storm chaser diorama. It's all going to start out with a piece of foam core, which you can get at most stores, but this is a 1/2 inch thick and I had to get it specially from an art store. I'm going to try and list it down in the description box if I can find a similar thing on Amazon for you guys. Once I had my foam core cut into the size of the diorama that I thought I was going to go with, I drew on some guidelines for the highway. I'm painting over the edges of the diorama that are going to be the dirt and the gravel with some wood glue, which has basically replaced white glue in my life, mainly because I ran out of white glue and I have wood glue on hand. I'm now sprinkling over the top some sand, some tiny bits of gravel, and some sawdust to make the texture for the dirt by the side of the road. I'm doing this a couple of times to make sure I get really good coverage all over the edges, especially since I'm going to be painting over this and I want to have really good texture on the base. This part can get a little messy when making dioramas, but usually I have a piece of paper or something underneath that I can use to catch all of the particles I brush off. Today I don't have that, so I'm just going to be sweeping it up with a paintbrush that I have lying around. Next, I'm going in with a brown base coat of acrylic paint. I'm using a dark brown color to start, and later I'll be using other colors to go over it, mostly doing dry brushing to highlight the rocky texture. This is surprisingly one of the trickiest stages of the diorama. There's nothing visually that really gives away the scale of the diorama at this stage, and I have to keep reminding myself that these are going to be boulders and not tiny grains of sand in the finished product, and try to remember to paint with less detail because it's going to be seen from further away in the scene. One of the ways that I've found to deal with this issue is to keep looking up real-life images of the things that I'm trying to create in the diorama so that I can see it from another perspective other than my own eye level. It also helped me to keep checking the size of things that I found to be very mundane, that I thought I knew all about, like the width of the street and the gaps between the lines. Little details like that helped me to keep everything in perspective. I'm building an N scale, so everything is 160 times smaller than it is in real life. It was really helpful for me to try and figure out what size everything would be in this scale, even if I then tweaked it a little bit or made it a little bit bigger or smaller based on how I wanted it to look. There were a lot of layers that I needed to let dry before I could move on to the next part of the diorama, but I'm using masking tape and I'm going over it with white acrylic paint. And then I'm going over the sides and the dirt to highlight all of these rocks that are actually boulders with some white paint. I'm taking almost all of the paint off of my brush, although you can see I had way too much brown on here, but that's fine because all of this is also mostly going to be covered up in the end by the smoke effect of all of the things getting sucked up into the tornado. I'm painting on what I originally intended to be a base for some static grass. I went ahead and added the static grass, but then I ultimately didn't like the look of it because the blades of grass were way too big. No matter how small, I tried to chop them down and I ended up removing them. But you can still see here, I decided to use a balloon and some static grass, charge up the grass, and then charge the balloon and use that to stand up all of the little blades of grass on the diorama. But again, I decided to scrap this a little bit later on because I felt like it was the wrong scale and it looked a bit weird. I didn't have any white glue, again, like I mentioned earlier in the video, so I'm still just using other things instead. I'm using Mod Podge here, and I watered it down a little bit so that I could still get the grass to stand up. But in the end, there was no point for any of this because I decided to brush it all off. It was way too big and out of scale, so I'm just going over with more green paint and trying to make it look like there's a little bit of grass and greenness underneath what I'm going to do next. I'm re-highlighting the rocks and everything after having put glue all over them, and then it's time to move on. Time to make the tornado, and I'm using floral foam. I've never worked with floral foam before for any of my dioramas, and I'm blaming that for the reason I had so much trouble cutting it up into the shape that I wanted. Here you can see me using a jeweler's saw. Oh, what's this? Someone left a comment in the comment section saying, why didn't I use a hot wire knife? Because that would have been very easy. And, so the reason for that is Okay, the truth is, when I was a baby, I was dropped from a very high height. And so, out of pity for me, you should go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Because, you know, you gotta help out where you can. So, next I'm using a hot glue gun, and I went over the foam and covered up all of that hard work to make it basically so that you can't see it at all. I used some cotton balls and then another layer over the top of the cotton balls of some polyester fiber for packing pillows and blankets and stuff. Using the two different kinds of fibers gave me more of the look that I was going for than if I would have just used one, and it held the shape up a lot better because I was going to be airbrushing this later on. I'm using some toothpicks to stick this thing in place. This made sure it was nice and sturdy and I didn't have to worry about it being glued down and getting knocked over by one of the cats or anything. Next, I sprayed it with some fixative and then I put it away to dry. And then I had an unexpected visitor take an interest in it. Oh my gosh. Oh, you guys. Stop it. Bro, why? No. No. What do I... Okay. So, let's bring this... Okay. Now what do I do? Come on. Come on. Come on. So I learned a valuable lesson. Put all of my dioramas in plastic boxes or bags while I'm working on them, but it's also cat repellent and keeps all ball from destroying them, so this works out for everybody. Well, except for the homeless spiders. The next part of the project was making the tiny vehicles that are being sucked up into the twister. I was super excited when I started the process of trying to make these cars because I thought it was going to be a walk in the park. Turns out I tried close to like 12, 13 different ways to make a car because initially I wanted to make the cars in a way where I would be able to reproduce them quickly because I'll probably need more of them for the rest of the series that I'm doing. I don't know why, but every attempt I tried to do this didn't work. And I have a video on my Patreon that I'm uploading with all of the different ways that you can not make a car. It shows some ideas that maybe with a little bit of tweaking could work, but that I ran into issues with for various reasons. In the end, I decided to just go ahead and sculpt out 2 cars out of polymer clay and use those, the originals, and not make extras. I'm still trying to figure out how to make a ton of reproducible tiny cars for the 6 Pine series. So I will have that for you guys in another video possibly, but I'm totally open to suggestions if you want to leave them in the comments down below. While I had the clay out and everything, I decided I might as well go ahead and sculpt the tiny person that is in the worst case scenario for going storm chasing. She's being sucked up by the tornado. Now, I'm gonna tell you guys right now, she survives, she's fine. She'll probably appear in another diorama somewhere, just so you know she's okay. But how did she end up here to begin with? While I'm sculpting her, let me tell you guys this quick little story. So she's an influencer, of course, aren't we all? But she got a deal. She heard about a twister outside of 6 Pines that's been there for a month straight, which is unheard of. Usually they're there and gone in a few minutes, and people from all over are going to see it. She thought this would be the perfect opportunity to gain tons of followers, and she's being paid a ton of money by the brand that's advertising this camera she's using. This was the perfect opportunity to get out there and get some images. The unfortunate thing is, once her and her team, and by her team I mean her and her best friend, got there close to the twister, it started to move and come towards them and suck up everything. They abandoned the vehicles, but unfortunately she was trying to get the perfect shot and she's the last one to leave, so she is dangling for dear life and getting sucked up into this twister. Don't forget, she makes it out alive. Just as the twister is getting way too close for comfort, it dissipates and everything drops to the ground. She's dangling from a wire, so she's okay, but it's so strange that it just disappeared into nothing. Or is it? I mean, things are always so weird around Six Pines. Who can really say? Is it abnormal behavior for a twister? Yes, it is. So that's the story. I'm now painting the cars with some acrylic paint that's metallic mixed with a couple of different colors. And I'm using those same pretty inexpensive acrylic paints to paint these guys. I got these from the craft store. They were like $1.50 per paint, and they're getting the job done, so it's okay. I usually use acrylic paints for all of the builds, but it depends what I'm going for, whether I will use more expensive professional colors or whether I'll use inexpensive ones that are just for crafts and hobbies and kids. And I actually like using the inexpensive ones because I like showing that you don't really need expensive colors to get your idea done. But also, I use tons of paints doing these projects, and it just makes more sense to use inexpensive ones for most things when I don't really need it to be too crazy. She has her little yellow raincoat on here for all the good that that's gonna do in this twister. And then I decided to give her a little selfie stick with her camera that she's got to deal with on it. I made the tiniest camera I could possibly make, and I just used a piece of plastic tube for the lens and plastic sheet for the camera itself. And then I'm painting that by hand with more acrylic paint. Now that these guys are all painted, they're gonna need to dry, so it's back to more waiting. But while that's drying, I'm gonna go over and start gluing in place the telephone poles and the wires and some of the things that are getting sucked up into the twister. I'm using hot glue, which I'm usually not the biggest fan of. Something about it just seems too annoying to deal with and temporary, even though I know it's not. It also usually leaves those tiny little wispy strands of hot glue when I move the hot glue gun away, but people in the comments section of a previous video told me how to get rid of those with a heat gun, so I've been trying to use it more. I want to have the cars look like they're being sucked up into the twister, so I need to create a ramp that gives the appearance that they're defying gravity. I'm using hot glue on a silicone mat, and then I'm adding in some of the cotton ball fibers that I used to create the twister, and I'm using that to blend it into the ground and into the twister itself. Now I am attempting to put the cars in place and stick them in with hot glue, but the one that's getting sucked up the closest to the twister has a little bit of trouble staying in the position that I want it to, so I keep fiddling with it throughout the rest of the build. I'm adding more polyester fibers along the ground to give the appearance of a bunch of smoke and dust and debris getting swirled up by the tornado. And speaking of debris, I have saved a bunch of little bits of trash and mostly polymer clay from an earlier attempt at making the cars that I used in the video. And I've got those all chopped up, and then I'm painting them, and I decided to put in a little bit of glue to make it easier to spread them throughout the twister. But these are going to be all of the pieces of things that this twister has sucked up along its path. I'm going in and painting some of the bits and pieces because I felt like they were all a little bit the same color, and I wanted to highlight some of them. And then I decided to use my airbrush to give some more dimension to the twister and make some shadows on it. I didn't know how I could paint it any other way, and the airbrush seemed to work really well for adding really subtle highlights and shadows. All that's left to do is paint the base because I don't like the edges of this foam board showing. And then we're gonna glue in our little person who's hanging on to this wire, and I'm using some hot glue for that. So here's a look at the finished results. I'm gonna have all of the supplies that I use in the description box so you can find those there. Big, huge shout out to my patrons, KNZ, Grouchy Old Man, Krista M0, Fatal Gift, Nicole K, Pat M, Suki T, Jordan, Sheila McC, Lizzie B, Ryan R, Cheryl R, Julia S, Isaac W, Naomi M, Gabriel K, Awkward Burb, and Fred. Thanks for hanging out and watching the video, guys, and I'll see you in the next installment of the Six Pine series or the next video. Bye!